Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso say they've quit the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. They accuse the regional bloc of deviating from its founding principles. The three Sahelian countries are under military rule. The takeovers took place in Mali in 2020 and 2021, Burkina Faso in 2022 and Niger in 2023. ECOWAS says the three countries remain important members of the community and pledged to find a negotiated solution. The African Union also backs a dialogue to end the crisis. So this week on the program, we ask, are Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso better off or worse off outside ECOWAS? And what can be done to end the standoff and find a lasting solution to the perennial instability in this part of West Africa? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, let's now bring in our panel of experts. Joining us from Abuja, David Oto-Endele, Director for the Geneva Center for Africa. In Lagos, Chuks Mko, Global Affairs Analyst. And joining us from London via Zoom, Dr. Alex Vines, Head of Africa Program at the Chatham House. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen, and thank you for joining in this discussion. Let me start off with you, David. Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso have announced they are leaving the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. How do the three respective governments justify their decision to exit ECOWAS? Do they have a case?
Well, of course, the trio forming the alliance of Sahel states, the Litako-Goma Alliance, or you can call it, came up with a decision and argued that ECOWAS had failed in the some kind of the precedents that was set by its forefathers. They accused the ECOWAS regional body of working against the interest of its member states, of course themselves. They talked about the fact that the regional body has not been able to assist them in fighting against security, especially the jihadist movement. They also accused them of some kind of liaison or working with what they describe as foreign elements to undermine the integrity and national security of their states. But I think they also talked about the fact that the sanctions that were levied upon them was inhuman. So I think what we're experiencing here is what was expected, especially after the issuance of ECOWAS of a threat to military intervention. So these countries have gone ahead at this point in time, previously establishing an alliance in September of 2023, and not honoring the Article Treaty of ECOWAS, with request that for a member to quit, they must give a 1-year notice. So we're left to see, if this verbal notice to leave is just a precedent to a formal notice. But as we speak, things are still unraveling. So,
Alex, a raft of accusations there, against ECOWAS from the three countries. But, looking at their decision to withdraw, is this withdrawal in the best interest of the three countries?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, look, they're going to need to have a visa regime. They're not going to have freedom of movement across the 15-member ECOWAS region. One of them is also saying that they may consider pulling out of the West African Monetary Union, which is the union that pins the West African CFA franc, which is pegged to the euro. So it doesn't make economic sense. This is emotional, it's political. My view is the timing of it is a statement of insecurity by these juntas. There's been frenetic diplomatic travel, including to Paris. The Chief of Army Staff of Algeria was in Paris just recently, first visit of such a person for 17 years. President Tinubu, Nigeria, been there. President Ouattara, Côte d'Ivoire, been there. And so this is all about politics, but it doesn't make a lot of sense economically. These are small, very weak states. They represent only 8% of the economies of ECOWAS. And so I can see why it makes good headlines, but it doesn't make good economics.
Chucks, I want to get your view here. Has the economic body, has the ECOWAS been a little bit too harsh on these three countries?
I think they've been very, very harsh. They started off wanting to intervene by taking a wrong step of bullying the Niger Republic, threatening to overrun the country. And that you don't do as an organization. You do not threaten people. You do not bully a sister nation like Niger. And Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger share a common destiny. They have a very strong affinity. The existence from independence, they've had experience with military rule. In Burkina Faso, you know, Burkina Faso is famously known by characters like Compaoré and Sankara. Mali had the same kind of experience with military shortly after independence, and Niger Republic. And being a member of ECOWAS with these things that has happened, they were led by misguided politicians. All ECOWAS needed to do was to persuade and use the third alternative of negotiating the military out of power. But it chose to bully Niger Republic and therefore forcing them together to say no. So I think that they overstepped their bounds, you know, by wanting to intervene the way they did. They've subpedal now, but the wrong step has already been taken, and it's been followed by sanctioning them, and that's another wrong step. When you have situations like that, you persuade, you use diplomacy and other carrots to bring them back to give up power.
I want to get your view here, David. Did ECOWAS overstep its mandate? Has it been too harsh on these three countries?
Well, I think if ECOWAS had thought about the secondary impact, you know, the third order effect or the unintended consequence, I think, you know, we would not be where we are. I think, you know, what ECOWAS, you know, was going by the books. I mean, of course, the ECOWAS, you know, Lomé agreement makes it very clear that, you know, unconstitutional removal of power, you know, has consequences. But I think where ECOWAS hit the crossbar, I call it, is at the point at which it used the threat of a military intervention instead of kind of prioritizing a negotiated settlement. I mean, of course, ECOWAS would argue that, you know, they were doing it simultaneously. But I think, you know, the threat of a military intervention would have been off the table altogether or completely. We had argued that from the start. So I think, you know, this would be seen by ECOWAS as of its own making. And this is why, as we speak, there is an ongoing conference which ECOWAS is holding to kind of train its members on how to negotiate, you know, how to communicate during conflict.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if this ongoing event, which is taking place in Nigeria, is simply as a result of the consequence of, you know, the military threat which was issued against countries like Niger. So I think, yes, you know, to answer your question directly, in my opinion, and perhaps in ECOWAS's own opinion, they hit the wrong target in terms of the preliminary, you know, talk of a military intervention, which has now alienated three countries. It's unprecedented in history to have three countries leave a regional bloc like ECOWAS. Yes, they will suffer, but it creates a very bad precedent, you know, for ECOWAS in terms of its ability to sustain the current 12 members, if we consider that 3 have already left.
So, Alex, the unintended consequences, let's look at that for a minute. Are there any political ramifications within Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger? And what would this all mean for a political transition?
The reality is there's been plenty of mediation by all sorts of people going to Niamey and Ouagadougou and Bamako. You know, on Nigeria, for example, on Niger, you had the Sultan of Sokoto, very influential individual who's been trying to mediate. And it has all been about the timetable of transition to return to constitutional rule and then elections. And my view is that that once you get men in uniform into political position, they start to become politicians and they start to become increasingly interested in the trappings of power, not being technical people any longer. And this is the problem. I mean, Mali is meant to have an election this year. It will not. And we have seen very good mediation in the past from ECOWAS. So it's wrong to say that they don't know how to mediate. There have been good offices, quiet diplomacy, very effective, well documented over 20 years, including in the past a transition of a year from a military regime to elections and then a democratic government in Niger. So the problem, I think, is about power, actually, and the difficulties of getting entrenched individuals who are not accountable to their populations to agree to a timetable to return to constitutional rule.
Chucks, your thoughts on that? Is this all about maintaining power rather than ECOWAS having overstepped its mandate?
When a man has power and access to resources of a nation, he's got to give it up. So this is about power, and the people that are involved are brilliant military officers. So what you can do, what you must do is to negotiate with them, recognizing that they must have ego problems. And some level of ego is required. You need ego, some level of ego to be successful in whatever you're doing. So in approaching them, you got to deploy the brightest minds in negotiating these guys out of power. By the way, they are citizens, these military leaders are citizens, bona fide citizens of their respective countries. And in their very presence, the politicians were reckless, misguided politicians ran down their countries in their very presence. To negotiate them out of power, you need to be patient, and it's going to take time. ECOWAS was in a hurry.
So, David, is ECOWAS worried here at all? Because who wins and who loses in this whole standoff? What does Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, what do they gain by leaving, or what does ECOWAS gain in the absence of the three?
Well, I think, first of all, one has to agree that ECOWAS has been consistently inconsistent in terms of how it has dealt with these military coups. And this is something that should not be forgotten. Niger Republic, for example, which was kind of the last straw in ECOWAS' way of handling things, was seen by many as, having taken the large end of the short stick, and many believe that the way that ECOWAS had reacted to Niger was very different from the way that they reacted to other military juntas. And, ECOWAS, of course, was accused, and rightly so, of, trying to undermine the national sovereignty of the country by saying that a military intervention was the next step. So I think, in terms of the who wins and who loses, both sides will lose. I mean, ECOWAS cannot afford to be seen as a regional body that loses 3 members at a go. At the same time, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger will have to think about how do they manage the free border movement, the free trade, being landlocked countries. Do they have to renegotiate with countries like Algeria? But of course, I think there will be some aspect of bilateral agreements. Countries run on the basis of interest. So there are no winners and no losers. But I think what we need to look at here is how does ECOWAS, renegotiate its position,
right,
and go back to these 3 member states and say, listen, let's think about this again. Let's talk about this relationship and see how we can mend it.
So, Alex, as we look at that renegotiation, I want to come back again and look at the sort of alliances that these 3 countries may be looking to build now, because by exiting ECOWAS, Alex, and having cut ties with France already last year, what is the alternative these countries are looking for? What are their long-term plans or the aspirations when it comes to allies economically or politically here?
So as we've all discussed, there are no winners out of this. ECOWAS loses, these 3 Sahel states are in poor shape. The reality is in Mali and Burkina Faso, the internal security situation is very poor indeed. Their economies are struggling, even with higher gold prices. It's still a very difficult situation. The paradox for me is that Niger is a bit different from the other 2, and I have at times been puzzled that they have decided to tie themselves as closely together to these two as they have. It is just an interesting footnote that the Guinean junta has been very clearly trying to make sure that it's distanced from what's happening with these three. So going forward, as your other speakers have alluded to, I think it's about negotiation. At the moment, this is politics, because the reality is you'd need to give a year's notice to withdraw from ECOWAS. So it is a lengthy process. There has been precedent previously. Mauritania has left ECOWAS, so there is some experience within it. And the economic ramifications of this are very serious. It's interesting that Mali, that is the most vocally anti-French, is the one that has said it will remain within the West African Monetary Union, which is the West African CFA franc pegged to the euro. I actually am not sure that these military men have a very good grasp of international economics. And so I do worry that they are good about security, but they're not good about growing economies, creating jobs and public goods for their populations. So this is a worrying time. My own prognosis for two of these countries, possibly three, is they're very vulnerable for a counter coup, unfortunately, because populations are going to get increasingly frustrated and exacerbated that the military men are not delivering the security and prosperity that they initially hoped that they would do.
Indeed, we will continue with this conversation in just a moment. But on that note, let's take a short break. And when we come back, we will explore possible solutions to this regional problem that has now taken a geopolitical turn. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with the discussion. Still with me in Abuja, David Otoendele, in Lagos, Chaksunko, and in London, Dr. Alex Vines. David, let me start off with you here, because last year the three countries formed the Liptako-Goma Charter. That was a security pact that was a combination of military and economic efforts between the three countries. What effect has this had on security in the Sahel? Can the so-called Sahelian alliance on its own really defeat terrorism and insurgency?
Well, what we've seen is a structure, what I call a verbal structure of establishing the Liptako-Goma alliance itself, talking about a common defense pact to fight against terrorism, but of course to also defend against any external aggressors. You know, we haven't seen the blueprint in terms of how that, the strategic implementation plan. But what we know so far is that, these three countries, of course, are facing a common threat, and they have also linked themselves very strongly to Russia and the Wagner Group, which, of course, is the new alliance, which came in the back of the exit of France and other, countries from the region. So we haven't seen how that alliance, will be able to, of course, come up with a common strategy, which, could somehow be similar to the G5 Sahel, which, they've also vacated. So we're hoping that, we would see some coordination and collaboration between the three states, from a counterinsurgency point of view, them working hand in gloves, dealing with the insurgency issue. But it all comes down to the plan. I mean, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the counterterrorism strategy which these three nations, have put in place, maybe similar to something like the multinational joint task force. So we are yet to see the impact of that. But what we can see on ground is the fact that there is an increase in jihadist activities within that Liptako-Goma triangle, which, of course, would be a headache for these countries. I understand from the recent communication that the Burkina Faso president gave an interview, and he talked about the fact that Russia is, has agreed not just to supply weapons, but to help the country in strategic and tactical operations. So let's see how that goes, and good luck to them. It's up to them how they deal with this at this point in time. Over.
Alex, looking at the security implication, in the Sahel region, how might the exit of the three, though, impact regional security dynamics, especially given the ongoing security challenges that David has mentioned in the region?
We all agree that the security is deteriorating significantly in Mali and Burkina Faso. It's problematic, but not quite so grave in Niger. And Russia has been, over the last year, significantly wooing the junta in Ouagadougou to be involved. The original Russian offer, in fact, was just to provide security for economic assets, the gold mines, and the Ouagadougou junta said no, that's not what they wanted. They pushed back on that. But clearly, some new agreement has now been reached, and there are this deployment of Russian military personnel to Burkina. Niger is still playing a much broader multipolar game, and there is still American security assets, a drone base, for example, in Niger, and I think the Nigerian will be a bit more careful in the way that they try and balance their partnerships. The way things are going at the moment, Russia is the kind of last resort place right. that juntas go to, because nobody else wants to supply and support and assist them, which is what we're seeing in Burkina and we've seen in Mali, for example.
Chucks, I want to rope you in here and get your view very, very briefly. Has anything changed? Has the security situation alleviated, particularly following the departure of the three from the G5 Sahel?
The three countries also need to look outside because, for instance, in Nigeria, we have not been able to deal with our internal insecurity challenges. And like they rightly complained, they've not been able to get help from ECOWAS in solving the challenges that face. France couldn't help them. In fact, that's what led to their insistence that France has to leave the shores of their nation. So they need to look elsewhere, not just Russia and the Wagner group. They need to sit down, collaborate. The three nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they need to deploy resources. The global challenge that we face within security is something I don't think that one government is going to solve at a go or in a long run. But I think that the global population, the global challenges, the environmental challenges, lack of sustainability effort and all that is going to continue to lead to insecurity. So you need a government and a group of people that can come together. Burkina Faso has gone through a very difficult and challenging time as a nation in dealing with insecurity. So they need to find a solution outside of ECOWAS, right. Outside of Russia, finding a bilateral arrangement that they can make to solve the problem of the Sahel. They have a common problem. They need to deal with it, but definitely not from ECOWAS.
So let's look at the solutions here, David, to you first here. What sort of logical solutions, because we've talked about the need for negotiation and looking forward, what sort of logical steps does ECOWAS need to bring back, the members? And are there possibilities, though, for ECOWAS to encourage the reintegration of the three?
ECOWAS needs to, first of all, realign itself to be a regional bloc that is not seen at least by these three member states as having influence from external parties. So they've got to look into that, which of course is a key element which these member states have mentioned. Then of course, ECOWAS should not forget that it did promise to carry out a military intervention against Niger. I think what ECOWAS should do now is to use that same capabilities to help these countries to fight against insurgency. Because if ECOWAS does have the capacity to invade Niger, as it says, then of course it should use that capacity to carry out joint military operations with these countries. That's something they should propose on the table. I think the other key element here is that ECOWAS needs to go back on the drawing board with these countries and be very clear in terms of the governance and the democratic processes. These countries should not use this as an excuse to stay in power. They should have a definite timeline in terms of, transition, from military governance to a democratic system. That should be very clear. And ECOWAS should also make sure that it institutes a mechanism that does not allow for constitutional coup d'etats, to happen. Because, of course, that will be ECOWAS's position to deal with the underlying causes. You cannot, have a double standard where some countries or leaders, are changing the constitution,
right,
or abusing the democratic process, and then, of course, they get away with it. But those who carry out military coups, are being pilloried. So I think it's very important that ECOWAS carries out this triple approach in order to win back perhaps the hearts and minds. Remember that these three countries have not left officially. They've just made a verbal statement.
Right.
The official process of a one-year notification is still not yet fulfilled. So there's still time, to turn the tides around, but ECOWAS must take the lead in doing so.
Alex, is there room for renegotiation here?
Oh, definitely. This is all about politics and negotiation. The juntas, as we've all the three of us, I think, agree, are trying to retain power. And so it is about how to negotiate down a time frame for a credible election process and return to constitutional rule. So we'll see. The problem is that, for example, the Malian junta has now been in power for over 4 years. That's almost the equivalent of a normal electoral cycle in West Africa. And so the longer you're in, as one of your other guests said, the sweeter it becomes if you've got the trappings of the state and you haven't even had to do an election to do that. All you did was stage a coup and throw some people out and then say, I'm now in charge.
David, I want to get your final comment here, because according to the bloc's treaty, member states wishing to withdraw must give a written notice for 1 year. What do you see happening during that time?
Well, I think, this is a treaty, and, states' sovereignty surpasses any regional bloc. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are within their rights to not even give any notice at all. Of course, because, from a technical point of view, they are no longer members of the ECOWAS, because, of course, they've been suspended, and sanctioned. So they do not have as much of a tie to ECOWAS as would be a normal member. But so, this is some of the arguments that, they believe, does not really permit them to give any 1 year notice. And as I said in the verbal statement, this is an immediate, action to leave. So, the 1 year notice thing is something that, it comes in under normal circumstances, like in the case of Mauritania in 2003 or so. But I think what we have to be very clear here is that the sovereignty of member states surpasses the regional bloc, and this is also very clear in ECOWAS's own treaty, that the respect for the rights of sovereignty of member states comes before anything else. So let's see how that process goes on. But be rest assured that if these three countries wish to leave immediately, there is nothing else that would tie them to maybe filling out forms, and saying that they have 1 more year to leave. You cannot be tied down to a regional bloc, especially one that you have been suspended from indefinitely.
Indeed. Thank you all very much for that lively discussion. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, David Otto Endele, Director for Geneva Center for Africa, Chuks Nkwo, Global Affairs Analyst, and Dr. Alex Vines, Head of Africa Program at the Chatham House in London. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. And you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. We'll join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.